Hello, and welcome to the Project Good podcast. I'm your host, Anne Marie Hilton. Project Good is a social impact podcast interviewing experts and advocates about the pressing problems that we face globally and hearing how they suggest we move forward in the future. The Project Good podcast is brought to you by Project Good Work. The goal of this podcast is to inspire people and organizations to develop a mindset that can move others to positive action regarding the complex social issues facing people and the planet. For our special edition, we're talking about the fourth stakeholder. In the past 3 years, people in many parts of the world are examining how they look at work and their careers since the onset of COVID-19. It was a wake-up call for the world. Many companies closed their doors or let go of their workers to save profits. Plus, in the midst of a crisis, systems that had been in place simply stopped. For the first time, people asked, who's in charge? Workers no longer were willing to continue on their same hamster wheel paths as before. Instead, it awakened a new level of required responsibility for companies if they want to exist in the future. To discuss the new level of framework companies need for the future, I have the pleasure of interviewing Victor Cho, who is the former CEO of Evite, the leading digital event service provider with a wide array of free, easy-to-use invitation designs and inspiration party planning tools. The company has sent over 2 billion event invitations in its history, enabling approximately 3 billion unique face-to-face connections. Recently, Mr. Cho stepped away from Evite to create a larger impact in the world with his fourth stakeholder project, where he looks at how companies and businesses can take a more holistic approach to business. Let's get into the interview. The year 2020 sped by and created a need for a revolution in how we look at work and society. Technology makes it easier to work anywhere in the world, and according to the Global Workplace Analytics, the number of people who work from home has risen by 159% since 2009. Technology continues to drive and bring society closer together, and it's predicted that by 2028, 73% of all teams will include remote employees. With such significant shifts in the way we work taking place in the next 6 years, the role of leadership becomes crucial to review. It is becoming clear to companies that they must start preparing now, and the people in leadership positions will need to adjust to sustain success for their organizations. Stepping up to help clear the plot is Victor Cho, who is examining all stakeholders in our world's future and what it means to have a seat at the table. Welcome, Victor.
So nice to be here. Thanks so much for having me.
Yes, thank you. So I'm so excited about this discussion. And what I usually do is before I start interviewing everyone, I like to know a little bit of kind of get how they think and a little bit of personal insight into who they are as a person. And so I wanted to know, since you've stepped away from Evite, what has been the most eye-opening experience that you've had?
So it's been a little over a year. My investment partner and great friend is now running the business. I'm still on the board, so still involved. And as you mentioned in your intro, I've been spending a good chunk of my time out in the world, both kind of defining a new method of thinking about stakeholder and stakeholder balance in business, but more importantly, just talking to a lot of people. So I think the most amazing thing for me has just been all of those conversations and just the wide spectrum of thought that's currently floating around this idea of businesses doing better in the world. And I'd say at a high level, I'm optimistic. I am optimistic at where the world is headed. It's still very early stage, but whether it's young kids coming out of college from Princeton or folks like at the Conscious Capitalism, I was at their CEO summit. There's just a ton of energy that wasn't there 20 years ago around elevating business as a force for good. So I think that's probably my big one.
I think that's wonderful that you're taking the time to kind of really dive deeper and get to know people on different organizations, kind of an interpersonal level, because I think right now, as you kind of mentioned, it's we have to, it's deeper than it used to be.
Hmm.
We used to just think of go to work, make some money, go home. But now, because of everything that has changed in regards to, how technology and how we've all our work lives are interwoven. Like one moment you might be in your kitchen making yourself some coffee, and then you jump onto a Zoom meeting, and then you have to go drop off a little one, and then you come back and you have to write a report. And so, thinking about how all of that is weaving into each individual worker's life, and even executives and founders, and how that is all kind of working, and how we move forward in a positive direction that I guess keeps the machine running, so we don't have another shutdown even without a pandemic.
Yeah, yeah, no, that's right. Yeah, I don't think there's been any as the psychological system shock that came from COVID, I think, in people's lives, just in terms of shaking them to the core and saying what really is important in life. I don't think there's been anything as big on a global basis in the last, I don't know, maybe one of the world wars, back 50, 60 years ago. Um, but now I do think there has been this epiphany that there is more to life than just being a mercenary and making as much money as possible, and there a lot of things matter. So I think it's one of the positive aspects of COVID.
Yes. And so, I guess, what took you on this? I guess let's start setting up the story. What took you on this journey to create the Force Stakeholder Project? What, I guess, chart in your heart?
Yeah, so I've always been uh, a believer in stakeholder balance in business. I was lucky enough to get exposed to it very early in my career. My first big job at Microsoft, actually, back in the '90s. They didn't use the language of stakeholders, but they absolutely were focused on, of course, the shareholder. One of the most profitable companies. Actually, I think they were the most profitable company at the time on the planet. But more importantly, they had an employee focus as a stakeholder that was, it set the foundation of what you see now with Facebook and Google, Apple, and all the other companies. Microsoft was one of the first to say, "Hey, we're going to let you come in and work whenever you want. It's going to be flexible. We're going to give you an incredible environment. Here's a kitchen with just it wasn't free, discounted food." So I saw the power of that on the employee base in terms of driving the business, and at Intuit, which was one of my roles, 10 years after, I saw the power of customer as a stakeholder. And Intuit actually used that language very explicitly. They said, "Look, we're as a business, we exist to balance all of the stakeholders," and they had entire what I call operational engines to make sure that the business was focused on both the customer and the shareholder and the employees. So I've always had that in my deep DNA that that's how a business needs to operate. The social angle, I'd say, it came from that just a deep personal belief that if you have achieved any kind of success in life, and I would absolutely put any senior business executive in that bucket. Uh, if you've achieved success, you've achieved that success on the shoulders of society, right? It's not just you doing all the work, and so you have an obligation to make sure that whatever system you're in control in is not doing harm in the society, and even better is actually doing something, giving something back. So, kind of the combination of those two thoughts led me to, hey, if we're really going to talk stakeholder balance, you need that fourth stakeholder. You need society to be part of that mix in a very explicit way.
Yes, and explaining these stakeholders. Normally when we hear the word stakeholder, we're thinking of large companies with shares and things like that. But can you explain each of the stakeholders? I guess the 1 through 3 and number 4, so that our audience can understand how you're referring to the different stakeholders.
Yeah, of course, of course. So the very first stakeholder, I would call the finance, the shareholders, or the folks that are providing financing for the business. So it was probably the earliest of the stakeholders because in the beginning of business, it was really all about just building a business that could survive, right? Investors would put in money, and the thing they cared about was, is this thing going to give me more money back? So shareholder return. So that's the biggest, the longest lived, and has been up until, and probably still is today. It is the dominant stakeholder in terms of how a business operates. So shareholders are kind of number one. In the more recent time frame, the customer that the business serves has really risen as an important stakeholder. So there's been a wave of not science, but approaches and methodologies for companies to really build better customer experiences over the last 30 or 40 years. I think there's no CEO today that would say, "Oh yeah, no, the only thing I have to do is make money, and my product can be horrible," right? Of course, because then the customers are going to bail. So customers are a
Yes.
strong number two, and they came second, I'd say, in the sequencing. The third, and this is, yeah, I'd say this is like in the last 30 or 40 years, the employee as a stakeholder in a very explicit way. The entire employee group that runs the business is getting an increasingly large voice in how the business is run, which is wonderful. Right. So it's no longer, I mean, there are still companies that will absolutely, take advantage of, abuse, and pay their employees the absolute minimum as possible. And you still see those. But increasingly, companies are viewing their employees as a critical stakeholder. Like they need an engaged employee base, they need high retention, they need to bring in good talent. So they're thinking about that deeply. So those are the first three, and that's where most businesses spend all their energy. Society, right? Kind of the broad, all the externalities of your business is the fourth, right? And that can include your suppliers, it includes the environment, it includes downstream impacts that your business might be having on partners, the community. But it's this large amorphous stakeholder, which is why it's been complex to bring it into a business operations frame. But it is, again, increasingly, I think we're seeing now with the waves of ESG, et cetera, it's becoming an important stakeholder to balance and manage. So that's I refer to it as the fourth stakeholder to make the point that it needs to be explicitly brought into the business and operationalized, just like the first three.
Yes, and this new stakeholder or the fourth stakeholder, society, definitely in this, I guess we'll just say 2020 revolution. All this, I'm using the word revolution. I know it incites people, but it really is. We are in a time of revolution, even if you're not out there marching and literally fighting. It's a revolution even in your mind. Simply the word revolution means to turn and change. Uh, People are having this whole mind shift. And if companies don't start, I guess for lack of better terms, understanding the psychology of the individual employee and how it relates to the company with their lives outside of the everyday, because each individual human, has their own, what I call like life story, right? We each have different things that we're dealing with, different backgrounds, all of that, and we bring those into the jobs that we have, and then now with this added layer of changes that happened in a very short time, it has caused. People not only to think differently, but as we see out in here on the television, everything act differently. Um,
Yeah.
so we have, I guess we can even call it, some people are referring to it as human point and 2.0.
Yeah.
So people have changed. They're not what they used to be.
No, absolutely.
And so, companies have to be aware that they are not dealing with the same person that they had pre-pandemic.
Hmm. Yeah. No,
and so,
totally agree.
yeah, so to include that, that is, I think one of the things intrigued me and I wanted to have this interview with you is that so many companies are not, stepping and taking this look that you have, that you're, now, selling or giving people information about. But it is so critical in order for us to keep, thriving in the regards to business as a society. And so, I guess if you were going to, like, if you're consulting different companies, What do you think that they should consider moving forward with this like new human 2.0?
Yeah, so my observation of what's happening in the world of business is, like, there's a lot of good intent. There are a lot of acronyms that are floating in, and a lot of different frameworks around how you as a business operate a little bit better. And so I'll just throw out some terms that are very common out in the language these days. Is it a purpose-driven business, right? Is there a strong social purpose behind it? There's a wave of something called ESG, environment, social governance, which is a long list of things that a company needs to do to be sure that it's got a good environmental footprint, is treating the society well, dealing with social issues, etc. There's a UN. The UN has released a list of, I think it's over 100 things that are important to the world, and signing up businesses to sponsor, be part of those things. And so the challenge that I see as an operator, because I've been operating businesses for 30 years, is that's a lot of great. Every one of those things is great, but your biggest challenge as a CEO is to figure out, where do I put my finite resources for the biggest impact. And so I see a lot of what I'd call shotgun, of people doing lots of things, but they're not necessarily the most important things. They're not necessarily the things that are going to have the highest impact. And so uh, I think my biggest macro comment to everybody is, you can't do everything. You need to figure out what is going to be the highest impact, either benefit that you can create, or what is the biggest harm that you're actually generating as a business. And you need to attack those and resource those things first, with the feedback loop from society in place. Yeah, if I had to describe my whole set of papers and articles in kind of two lines, it would be that. Uh, so yeah, no, that's I think that's the first thought that comes to mind from your question.
Yeah, and then one of the things, this is what I always and this might be, I might be the playing kind of the devil's advocate a little bit,
Hmm.
but there are a lot of companies that are like, and I understand how people are like, well, why should I be taking responsibility for society? I'm just trying to do my business.
Hmm. No, no, I'm no that absolutely, and that is, it's funny. Yeah, capitalism's been around in its current corporate incarnation. You could argue, with the beginning of the East India Company back in like the 1600s, I think. So call it 500 years of capitalism, which has been grounded in an ethos of that, which is, hey, the only thing that matters is that I make a healthy business, right? Make a profit. Like, just leave me alone. Nothing else should matter. And that's permeated the psychology of business forever. When I left, I went to a business school called Wharton. When I left Wharton, I remember very vividly. I had been trained, literally. I can see the paragraph, on the page, saying, like, the role of an executive in business is to maximize shareholder value. That's the only role that you have. And so we have this huge cohort of people that say, yeah, that's my job, right? It's just to make money, it's make this thing make money, and that's all that's needed. Um, at the surface, that sounds logical. I like to make parallels and just use a metaphor of a town, because businesses at the end of the day are kind of like people. So imagine you made a city and you filled it with people, and you said, hey, everybody, guess what? We want to have a great city, and really all you need to do in terms of all your behavior is make as much money as possible. That would be a terrible city to live in if you think about it. Like, nobody would be helping anybody unless there was a financial interest. People would be doing, whatever they could to make the buck, even if it damaged their neighbors, right? Because it's like, oh, I don't care if it hurts somebody else. And so that's, as the highest level operating principle for business, that can't be the sustained model, but that's kind of the model we have been in. So it needs to shift. Um, and it's going to take a long time. It'll take decades, maybe more, right, for the fundamental mindset of what is a business, like, what is its role in society, and is it just to maximize, right, profit and be healthy, or is it, no, it's actually a citizen. I like to use this term, business citizen. It's a citizen in the world community and needs to act as a good citizen.
Yes, when you were talking, it reminded me, and I forget what year it was or what years. but France, this is way back when. I don't know if this is like before the Industrial Revolution or around it. I forget, but they had made it that people were working. I think it was like every day of the week with no time off, and
Hmm.
it ended up making everyone in the society sick,
Yeah.
because everybody was just focused on like we gotta just work, and people forgot about the other aspects of living, and that's really, in my opinion, what 2020 did. Ironically, or you know we don't plan the future, but I guess the future knew that it would pick the year 2020 to give us clear vision of,
Yeah.
of what we had really created on this planet.
Yeah.
And it was the only moment, I believe, that, well, we know it's the only moment that we've experienced, in modern times, that we literally hit the stop button. Um, and it also, I have to say, from a personal aspect, scared me a little bit, that we could just essentially almost like just pull the plug, and everything literally stopped. We don't we
Hmm.
No more flights, no more anything. And it made me think, well, what is this? What are we in?
Yeah.
Exactly. Because if we can just push a button in a few days and make everything stop, and life's changes, well, it's kind of like my introduction, like, who really is in charge?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Are we in charge of ourselves? Are we just like, these as everybody thinks, cogs in a machine, and
Hmm.
and now we realize that, like, we've been tricked or something. It really, for me, I started thinking, well, if we can just do simple things like that, then we're choosing to make our society um the way it is, in this like sickness of just me,
Yeah.
and we're not thinking about the impact. And so now we've been, I was putting in terms of like we were grounded. Literally we were.
Hmm.
And now we had to look at what the horrible things that we had done. And
Yeah.
and it was just coming to us like, I would never ever want to be like grounded like that again.
Yeah.
It's like, it was just shocking. It was like, oh, okay, now there's like, this climate crisis. Oh my gosh, now there's people off the streets protesting. Now there's, oh my gosh, okay, I'm sorry. That's what I was thinking. Like, I know I was a bad kid, but
Yeah, no,
that's
it's
what I was
crazy to
trying.
think it's crazy to think how much stress came into the world in that, like, there was like this 3-year window between, yeah, between COVID, political environment. Yeah, I remember here, I live in south of San Francisco. We had these crazy wildfires where, we walked outside, the sky was
Yes.
was deep red, like there was smoke everywhere. It's like the
Yes, I
apocalypse,
remember
but
seeing
you
the
couldn't go
pictures.
anywhere because it was
Yes,
COVID.
exactly. The pictures I saw online, it looked like the apocalypse. I was like, oh,
Yeah.
San Francisco does not look like it's been good.
No,
Yes.
it was a crazy time. It was a crazy time.
Yes. And so, in that like major wake up call, the thing that shocks me is, after we spent a year of like every day being like you got, sucked into the twilight zone. I would have thought that that would have, made people start, quote unquote, straightening up. Right.
Yeah.
But we find that it still did not make some people wake up. So how do we start changing the mindsets of people, um to
Yeah.
start thinking about the impact that they make in the world differently? I don't know, like, I thought that would shock anybody.
I think I'm a little more optimistic in that because these things these changes take so long, but there are some signals for sure that I think point to a fundamental mindset change. So definitely, and I see this on the recruiting side, as we were hiring people, like the percentage of employees that were looking for more meaningful work and how that became and is becoming a much more important component of their job search, I think has gone up, way up. So I'm a member of a bunch of executive councils, right? And there are a lot of people in those councils that are actually at this stage, and these are, very senior folks in organizations, some fairly large companies. Um, they're all rethinking, like, hey, is this all there is? Or is this, do I want to go do something more meaningful? So, they haven't switched their jobs yet, but they're gonna switch. There's a large chunk that are going to start moving into things that they feel have a greater impact. So, that was just one thought. And then just the other day, I saw, America is the country of workaholics. We have I think the highest level of, per hour, per capita working hours, and it has not moved forever, and it's starting to come down. Um, so like and this article specifically talked about, white executive males as a cohort because it had just tracked that, but that was down by like 4 hours, 4 to 5 hours a week, which according to this article, that's the first time they'd ever see it go down. It had been just high forever, and so I'm hopeful that people find a little bit more balance, a little bit more purpose in what they do for what is a third of their waking time or a third of their total time. Yeah.
Yes. So with this, new look at how people are, thinking about themselves and, the personal impact that they make in, their jobs and society, how would you suggest then, one of the big things, as I'm sure you've seen, is there's the thing of called the big quit, right? Where people are just like,
Hmm.
adios to their job. And how do then companies that want to continue to thrive and attract employees, um, how do you think they should be, I guess, going about their recruitment efforts differently than they have in the past?
Yeah, well, I think for any company, in particular, yeah, no, actually, I was gonna say it's if it's beyond just hiring a younger work cohort. Yeah, I think any company that needs to hire anybody or retain anyone at this stage needs to have a strong message around how they are a good business citizen or becoming a better good business citizen. I think I think businesses that are operating in what I call that business mercenary mode, and I define that by that old archaic, the only thing that matters is corporate profit. Companies that operate in that mode are going to have a very hard time retaining and hiring people. And you can only, you can't fake that. Like, yeah, maybe there's small things you can do, like, oh, but we're donating this, a small fraction of our profits to this charity. Aren't we great? But if on a day-to-day basis the employees look at your business and see you're creating massive societal harm and you're not doing anything about it, right? Or maybe you're not doing as much as you could, right, to help. They'll know. They'll know. So it's, I think my short answer is that you need to walk the walk. Like, people need to move out of this business mercenary mindset and actually, whether it's applying my framework to how they operate or one of the many other methods of elevating their business citizenship, right? They need to do that, and they need to be public about it. As one case in point, right? Facebook is having a really hard time holding and recruiting good talent because they have not gotten on top of some of their biggest social impacts in terms of disinformation spread, in terms of potential teen depression. Like, there's huge smoke coming out of the ecosystem that is Facebook, and they're not on top of it. So until they do, they're going to have a very hard time with talent.
Yes. Speaking of Facebook, I was thinking those are some first time and unusual problems for a
Hmm.
company to have to face because they are dealing with um uh you know um I guess we'll just use the word exploitation of minds conflict.
Yeah.
If that makes, yeah. And so, and I think never before has a company had to be like face such kind of accusations and problems of that. It's like they have to face the problem of they're messing up employees psychology. And so
Yeah. Well,
that to me would be like the hardest thing to overcome, because how do you even approach that because each individual is wired so differently.
Yeah. So it's funny. When I talk about this topic, I have a slide, and I do fundamentally believe this. Like, no business, no founder creates a business to burn the world down, right? And just abuse society. So when Facebook in its formation was all about an amazing purpose, right? Connecting people around the world, right? And building those connections. And it was an amazing vision. And what the reality, though, is as businesses get larger, there are what are called second order impacts, right? Like these systems that get built have potentially unanticipated consequences, and the businesses that create them absolutely need to get on top of them. That's the big flaw that I see. It's funny. I equate it to people. You ask people, what's the worst business industry in history? And a lot of people will say, well, the cigarette companies, because they're killing millions of people around the world, right? Even the cigarette companies didn't start knowing their product was killing people, right? Back in the 1800s, people loved it. It was just a great product, right? The business was like, hey, this makes us feel good. Wait, we don't think there's anything wrong with it. Let's just build a business around it. So, even those guys didn't realize the downstream effects. Now, of course, over time, it became very clear that those things were, cigarettes are horrendous for health. And then they operated in pure mercenary mode of, okay, we're going to hide this. We're going to, shelve the research. We're going to keep this thing alive as long as possible. So, they absolutely failed later on in the cycle. But no, to your point, these problems often crop up after the businesses have gotten to some semblance of scale, which does make it a little bit harder to address. But they're the only ones that could address them, right? It's either that or you wait for regulation, which is kind of the current model. But that's
Yes.
just way too slow.
Yes. And speaking of regulations, and yes, and speaking in the case of regulations, how do you think that companies or governments should shape, or maybe you don't think should shape policies to include some of the fourth stakeholder elements? I guess
Yeah,
let's first ask, do you think that governments and companies should have policies that go for the four stakeholders? And then we can kind of talk about what that would look like.
yeah, that's a great question. I literally just this week I've had a couple of conversations with folks around here. What is the role of government to mandate things like social responsibility within the business sector? And I don't think I've formulated my opinion yet on the best method. There's pros and cons. There's pros and cons to government doing anything because the world just moves so fast. And so the big con of government getting involved is that we'll come up with something and then it gets fixed and it's just not fast enough, right? Because the world is moving so fast. What we really do need, at the highest level, really what we need is the government to basically say, every business, you're going to be a good citizen, which is just too amorphous and not data driven, not quantifiable. So, like, there's no regulation that you could put in to say, yeah, you're going to be a good person, basically, in this world. That being said, I do think there may be things that can get introduced in some of the more formal structures of government. So, yeah, one tactical example that I've been toying with is there's all of the investor uh, um, kind of formal documents that go in for larger companies include a statement of risks, like what are you doing to mitigate your financial risks? What are you doing to mitigate your environmental risks? That type of thing. So, there might be ways to incorporate some of the thinking in there, but my gut says it's not a big role that government plays, and that it's more something that it's a societal ethos, right? That in the same way the government never said to companies, your fundamental goal is just to maximize shareholder profit, right? That wasn't a government mandate or regulation. It just is how the society thought of this whole tier of industry, and that can morph and change over time, I hope.
Yes. There's this, I'm sure you've heard about it, and it's a growing thing. It reminds me of like social scores. I'm sure you've heard about each person having like their social score, and that'd
Hmm.
be like having your credit online. And so I was reading an article some time ago of kind of having companies have social scores as
Yeah.
well as with people. And I guess, do you think that would be a good thing, a bad thing, or maybe just backfire because, there's always those people, of course, that just want to ruin everything and get out there and be like, I hate every company, I hate everything. And then they ruin everybody's social scores. Yeah.
Yeah, that's also a really tricky one. There are many social scores that will actually do the opposite of what's needed because they're not constructed in the right way, and instead they'll just measure an arbitrary list of things, right, and give you a score. But that's not what we need, right? If a score, let me put it this way, a social score can work if that score is measuring more companies' behaviors, right? So if it were to capture the answer to this question, which is like, have you identified all of your major second order harms? And are you working to rectify those? And do you have a plan? Like if that can get incorporated into the score, then I think a score can be very powerful. If the score is nothing more than a checklist against a list of things, like how are you doing on, carbon footprint, how are you doing on diversity, et cetera, then I think it's still good in that, right, it's going to drive some of those behaviors, but it will not lead the business to tackle the biggest things that are most important. And just one example of that, not that we'll plug on Facebook the whole time, but Facebook's a great example. Like you could envision a world where Facebook gets a great score on those things because it turns its servers green and it has a diverse workforce, but it hasn't fixed, right, what is arguably the most important thing, which is what are social networks doing in terms of disinformation, propaganda spread, depression, right? And in my mind, you can't, you should not be able to get the green light on social score unless you have attacked that thing. So again, it can work if it's structured in the right way, more around behaviors and less on specific elements, if that makes sense.
Yes. No, that makes perfect sense. It kind of reminds me of, um, what is it? I'm going to say it, and I know people are going to be like, but it kind of reminds me of like affirmative action. That, in some ways, this is my personal opinion, I'm going to know, that some ways it backfires and people go, okay, we did this, we did this, we did this.
Mm-hmm.
But then there's the everyday interactions that aren't equating to that, the people moving forward as that was supposed to be in place. Like sometimes putting um, rules and regulations in place like that kind of make people just like use it as a checkbox, but they don't really look at the um, how did we get here, or why did we get here, or what is it really doing? All of
Yeah.
that is kind of lost in it because we're
Yeah.
just like, okay, we did this, kind of like a grocery list.
Yeah, totally, totally. Yeah, that's my fear. And I do see some of those metrics forming that are in that grocery list mode, and I'm like, ooh, that's not good. Yeah, again, I go back to that citizen metaphor. Like, imagine you're in a town, you're trying to figure out if people are good citizens. On one hand, you got a checklist of, okay, did they take out their garbage? Like, do they have a good job? Are they donating to charity? Right. So there's that. That's the tactical list, and you could look at that and say, oh, yeah, they're a good person, maybe.
Yeah,
but
yeah,
but but
maybe.
but maybe not, right? Like the better list is something like, hey, is this person willing to, sacrifice some of his own time to help the community, right? Has this person is this person doing anything that's causing significant harm to the community that they're not on top of, right? And those things are way more amorphous. But the problem is the world just likes to measure stuff, right? They like these quantifiable things, and this is actually not in my articles, but I should probably add it, right? That this idea of citizenry is never going to be a single measure, a single checklist, because of that. Which is why it's hard. That's why it's hard to treat society as an actual stakeholder because it is more amorphous.
Yes, and that, you brought up something that is making me think and think and think. And I'm going to go from the practical standpoint, as if from a company owner or a leader of a company, that um, I would just respond, and this is me in a bluntness, would be like, but I don't have time for all this.
Yeah,
Just simply, that's, if that's what I would think that I would get a feedback from a lot
yeah,
of companies. They're like, sounds good and well and everything, but I don't have time for this. I just don't, and then you want me to, keep a company where we got to be profitable, got to like
yeah,
hire diverse, like I just, I don't have time for it, right? That's what I believe a lot of, company people will say. And so, how do we make this practical? Because this is, we're blending in two elements. One that I would say is, this, we have to do practicality and logic, being step A, step B. And
Hmm.
then now we're being asked in this new fourth stakeholder to blend in that. I'm just going to call it the feelings or the fluffy, the I guess the feelings. And usually in business, at least this is, and I'm, maybe dating myself, but I was just always taught, like, put the feelings aside.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so now this new world is asking us to somehow figure out, how do we tie feelings and business together.
Yeah. Yeah. So two thoughts on that. Well, one is, I think if it were purely left to the realm of feelings, we'd be in a world of pain. Because I completely agree. That's just way too arbitrary. So one thing that's actually it's in a set of the articles that I put out is that there are ways to quantify fuzziness, right, in a way that's not precise but directional, right? So you can, as a business, figure out like what is the largest impact that I'm having, let's say negative impact that I'm having based on like how many people is it impacting, right? How serious is the thing? Are you killing 1,000 people or 10,000 people, or are you right? Polluting something that's creating some, killing 1,000 fish. Well, 1,000 people is way worse. Killing 1,000 people way worse than killing 1,000 fish, right? So there's a way to get it down to a measured impact, which can help you make the decisions. Is thought number one. But going back to your other one of it's hard. My message is absolutely it's hard, and the executives and leaders that can balance multiple stakeholders, that is a higher order skill, right? There are many people who would do fine in a world of optimized shareholder that are going to have a hard time with those trade-offs. And I think maybe this is one of the most important messages. We should not put those people into positions of power if they can't do the balance, because there are absolutely people that have the leadership skills and the system complexity to be able to think about employees and customers, right? They're already doing it with three, right? Employees, customers, and shareholders have a lot of trade-offs. So a business that's working with just the first three stakeholders already has that DNA. Now you're just adding a fourth. It's not a quantum state change in complexity. It's yet adding one more stakeholder to the table if you do it right. So, my thought would be, I hope what we see over time is that our bar for leadership goes way up, right? The people that we put into the, as CEOs in these companies, need to be able to demonstrate that they can do this. Because if they don't, then they're just going to degrade back to mercenary behavior. Because it's easy. It's actually easier. It's way easier to run a business as a mercenary.
Yes. Yes. It reminded me, I don't know, this is going to sound weird tangent. It reminded me of Captain Hook.
Oh
Throw him
no, say
over.
more. Oh yeah, yeah,
That's,
no, exactly. Yes, I love that.
yeah, throw him to where's that alligator? It's throw him over, or the
Yeah,
crocodile. Yeah. And
that's
yeah, it
fun. I
is
love
easier.
that.
Just, it'd be easier to just be like, I'm done, throw him the crocodile
Yeah,
next. Yes. Um, so, so this does come to the whole thing of, we need to pick better leaders in the future, and leadership then, in this new decade is being redefined, I would say. It's being
yes,
redefined, and I guess it's a good thing that people should be embracing this new take on leadership, and that maybe people now who were trying to run to be a leadership position, now they should examine themselves really
hmm,
deeply,
yeah,
to say, am I really up for this? Not only do I have to worry about, profits and people, but I now have to worry about, I was going to say feelings, but I can't really put that in P. I was trying to go peas, peas, peas. But I guess, uh, and people's perspectives, and
yeah,
and how they feel, which is, you know it's a huge challenge.
yeah,
And so I think, yes, you're 110% right. Leadership and who our leaders needs to be examined very closely in order for companies and organizations to move forward in the future in a positive way. Yeah, it's a tough one. And you know what? I'm like trying to think really deeply. Do I know or can think of anyone that can do this? Maybe, but I'm not an insider. It's just because I am maybe like what is it? And Sean Connery kind of it always reminds me of is Branson, the only one, but I don't know. I've not been inside of his
Okay.
company,
Yep.
but seems to come off that way. That's his image, that he's able to be profitable and also personable
Yep.
to staff. This is the image. I'm not inside, but that's the only person I can think of.
No, the good news is because I do interact with a ton of senior execs. Um, there are a gazillion out there that have the DNA to balance in what I call the stakeholder world. They can do the complexity now. The change now is they just need to bring that fourth stakeholder in a more explicit way. I think there hasn't been a great process to do that, which is the whole reason I wrote my articles. But I'm very bullish that once people um, make the mental leap of, oh yeah, I'm going to bring in society as a stakeholder, like show me how that engine runs. That there's a ton out there that maybe they don't have the brand cachet of a Branson, but they're out there. They're out there in spades, which makes me more optimistic.
Yes. And so, in closing, um, let me see here. I'm trying to think about, I guess, if we were to, paint an ideal picture. I think that's the perfect way to close, because I think people need to be able to visualize in order to make it a reality. So, if all your stakeholders were working correctly,
Yeah.
what would that look like?
Yeah. So the future world of where we should be.
Uh-huh.
uh, it actually impacts every layer of society, which is why I do think it is, it's decades and decades of change. But we'll start with investors. Investors increasingly are investing in companies that are good citizens, and they're penalizing companies that are not acting as good citizens, independent of how much return they're making. Right. So they give a little bit of return off the table because like it's the equivalent of investing in a cigarette companies. We have precedent. Right. There are many investors who would not invest in those businesses. So just need to expand that concept of citizenship. Boards that are hiring CEOs and holding them accountable and incenting them need to make sure that the CEO at the end of the day is running the business under a balanced stakeholder, including all four stakeholder model. Right. Therefore, the CEO and the executive team need the skills to be able to actually operate the business that way. The employees in the company, I think, need to use their power as a stakeholder and say, hey, not only do you need to treat us well, but we're only going to work for businesses, right, that are actually treating customers and society well, right? Customers, like further down the chain, should only, at some point, will only buy from responsible companies. You're actually seeing this. This is maybe one of the fastest ways that's happening now. The younger cohort of customers are both paying a premium and redirecting their dollars into brands that are more responsible, which is actually amazing. It's going to help the whole flywheel move faster. And then the last one would be the education system, which I'm also fairly bullish on. Right, needs to indoctrinate the next wave of executives coming out that it's more than just shareholder return. Right? Your role as an exec is to create a balanced stakeholder business. Um, all those things can happen over time. It's just going to take some time. But I'm optimistic we end there. We end up there in the next anywhere from 30 to 50 years. With some areas going faster.
Yes, yes, and and I think it may even happen sooner. And the only reason I say it might happen sooner is because of if technology continues at the rate that it's been moving at. I think we'll be forced into that because people will be like, I don't need to be in the office. I don't need to even be in the same country. I'm doing my job, and so I think people are going to be faced with, okay, well, I can't make somebody do what I need them to do, so I'm going to have to change.
Hmm.
So, yeah.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for your time and insight, Victor.
Oh my God, no. Oh no, Anne-Marie, it's been my pleasure.
Yes, thank you. To learn more about Victor and the Fourth Stakeholder, go to victorcho.com/fourth stakeholder. If you have a passion for an unserved community, a social justice problem, or want to change minds, contact Project Good Work at projectgood.org to start your project of change today. We'd like to send our deepest gratitude to our ongoing show supporter, Blair Chapman. Subscribe to our mailing list at projectgood.org/subscribe to get our episodes and blog articles sent to you each month. Plus, get a 10% discount on any project you start at projectgood.org. It's conference time, and we're hosting our first annual Changemaker Conference virtually on May 25th. Registration is now open, and each full registration includes a lifetime of membership to the Project Good Work Changemaker community. Go to www.changemakerconference.com to purchase your ticket now. To our listeners, thanks for tuning in to Project Good, where we're focused on what matters.